A very good morning and welcome to Media Monitor, the show that monitors and evaluates media coverage of leading stories of the week and puts the media in the spotlight. I am your host, Alicia Jali, and we are live right here on SABC News Channel 404. In our lineup today, we look at the media coverage of the Amcu new wage deal that could end the 5-month-long strike action. We'll also look at the media coverage of the Lwandle evictions, Bokamoso in QwaQwa Free State, plus the Alexandra evictions. The coverage of Nyaope addicts taking charge of their lives. Find out if the media is getting fatigued by the Boko Haram terrorist group, and is the 2014 Brazil World Cup getting enough hype? And lastly, our youth panel will analyze Youth Day coverage. Now, to give us analysis on media coverage of these stories, let's welcome Mr. Matthew Wate, a research manager at Media Tenor, Mr. Phenyo Butale, Executive Director from Freedom of Expression Institute, and for our youth topic, we have Nomzamo Buyani, a final year journalism student at Damelin College, Mandla Mathebula, a former media studies student at the University of Limpopo, and Refiloe Ramahlokoane, a grade 10 learner at Reasoma Secondary High School in Soweto. And later on the line, we'll be joined by Richard Iroanya, a political analyst. Remember, you can call us to give us insight on the stories that you think deserve to be covered by the media, but were omitted, of course, on +2711 714 6847, 714 6843, and 714 6857. You can also share your views and comments on Twitter at SA Media Monitor and like our Facebook page, Media Monitor. A very good morning to you. In our top story today, members of trade union Amcu asked their leader, Joseph Mathunjo, on Thursday to accept a wage increase of 1,000 rand each year for the next 3 years for the lowest paid platinum workers. Let's take a look at this clip.
Congratulate the negotiators, that is the parties to the apparently happening deal, and my faith in them has been vindicated, that they've proved me right to say I'd done enough work and they were going to finish it on their own.
Few issues that has been raised that has to be taken back to the employers for their consideration. I believe they are not huge. They are not in such a way that they cannot be addressed.
And you can start calling us and sending us tweets to give us your views on what you think about the latest wage offer. Now, panel, a very good morning to you, and thank you so much for being here on Media Monitor this morning.
Morning.
Now, gentlemen, let's first commend media for the coverage in terms of trying to explore all the different angles pertaining to the strike, but it all came a bit late. What do you think about that, even now, in terms of the recent negotiations, Phenyo?
Yes, I think, you know, when you look at the issue of the strike, obviously mining being such an important component or you know, aspect of our economy, obviously the angle of the economic angle would have dominated.
Yes.
And because there is need really to look at how the strike is going to affect the economy and stuff like that. And as you say, the media tried to explore the various angles in terms of...
After we badgered them on the show that we wanted to see the
yes,
humanitarian side of things.
Yes, and I think, as you say, it came in late to say that, and I think we should always say this and say that the media should always try and put a face to these stories, because for the miners, it's not about the economic downturn or the statistical analysis to it. It's about an actual meal not being there on the table. So I think that's something that we still need to push and ask for from our media.
Matthew, what's your views?
Well, I think the mining strike as an issue is a complicated one for the media because it has such massive implications, especially this last week. I mean, we had the deal coming this week, but at the same time we had downgrades from various rating agencies, very much tied to the fact that the strike has been going on for so long. So the media are in the position of having to report on a wide variety of issues, all drawing essentially from the same strike action by Amcu. And in addition, there's also the matter that the strike itself is in a way a very political issue because there's obviously the fallout within COSATU, the role that NUM and the ANC are potentially playing against Amcu. So it's a very difficult for the media to try and present a completely full and balanced story, especially in platforms that require shorter versions of stories. Broadcast media, for example, when you may only have a few minutes to give a story, to try and do that in a very balanced way is incredibly difficult. And I think this week we've seen, as a result, the strikes have just dominated the news this week.
We know there's editing, Matthew, but are you saying we should lose facts in that editing?
Well, no, not lose facts, but I think we need to understand that when you see one story about a strike, you need to understand you're not getting the full story. You need to, as a consumer of the media, you need to go out and look for different angles. You need to read different newspapers, watch different news sources online and on television, and for yourself, look for the full story. You can't accept one source.
Very interesting that he mentioned the implications, because that was my next question, Matthew, that has the media really given us the real implications of the strike? And at this point is where media should have given us their conclusion about what they thought about this whole strike, but they seem to be just taking the lead from what they're getting from overused resources. Phenyo.
Yeah, well, I think you're right that the media tends sometimes to take the simple story or the easy story, which is what the minister says, what the mine bosses are saying, what Amcu is saying. Maybe the analysis there is what is lacking. But I think to agree with him that sometimes the complexities of the story dictate sometimes that when you write a particular story, you take a particular angle so that you present it fully. But I really think still that there's need to take the story down to the lowest level to say what is it, what does it say, what are the implications for the people involved who are the miners and their families. And obviously the grand story would be how the economy is affected, but as I say, there's need for a face to every story.
And Phenyo, what should then South African media learn in terms of covering strikes from the strikes? I mean, we heard that they were not giving us the full story or exploited every single angle right from the beginning. What should they then learn? I mean, we are going to have more strikes in the country. Matthew?
Well, I think for a starting point, I think it must be said that the media has done a fairly good job I think the strikes this time around, perhaps they've probably learned the lessons following Marikana, was that the strikers themselves play a big role.
The strike really received attention further on. It received attention at the beginning, but then it sort of died down in the middle, and then everything was lost in between, and then government intervened, and then there was a renewed interest of media.
That's true. I think probably in terms of the press coverage, I think the financial press have covered the story basically throughout, because it has, throughout the 5-month period, it's played a big role in South Africa's economy. So I think the financial press have covered the strike quite well. But as you said, the human element was certainly lost throughout the middle period. And I think that has only emerged back in the last few weeks. And it's important to note that the press in South Africa, the media in general, are quite stretched. We've got a very large country, a lot of stories going on. And, it's perhaps the lesson they should learn is that the human elements within these stories can't be forgotten. And I think that the strikers who've been on strike for 5 months, that's 5 months without an income for them. And I think that's an angle of the story that could have been better exploited, certainly in that middle period.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for that. All right, saying that we shouldn't forget about the humanitarian side. Let's take a caller on the line. A very good morning to you, sir. Your question or comment, please.
Hi, Alicia. How are you?
We're very well, thank you, sir. Who are we speaking to?
It's Lucky from Tepe.
Lucky from eThekwini, Siyabonga Bhuti. Please go ahead with your comments, sir.
Yes, last week I said that people must learn that in order to meet some demands, there has to be compromise. And shortly after my call, someone from Gauteng called and say it is ridiculous, it's 12,500 or none. And look now, an agreement is on the horizon, and in that agreement there will be compromise. And I know that the argument which they were pushing forward is that the CEOs are earning lots of money. Let's, for example, take Chris Griffiths, the CEO of Amcu. Last year, he was earning about 17.6 million. And there are people who are saying that, no, let's cut the CEO salaries and give the workers. And if you cut the 17.6 million into half, you get 8.8 million per year. And when you look at that 8.8 million per year, that comes to 700 133,000 rand per month.
All right, Lucky, you're going to have to hurry up, please, Lucky.
Yes, I'm concluding. Then in that 733,000 rand per month, if you divide that with the number of workers which are striking, you will find that it's 37 rand per month for each worker, and that comes to nothing. So when you go to strike, you need to understand that there has to be a compromise. You cannot get anything at once, little by little. Eventually, the workers will reach what they want.
Thank you so much, Lucky, for your call out in Durban. Do you agree with him, Panel? He says that there needs to be some sort of compromise, and I think we touched on it a few weeks back. You were not here, Matthew. The panel was saying that the negotiations were not there because it was just a wage demand, and that's what the media said. They were saying that Amcu is demanding this. We never really got to understand the aspect of negotiations.
I think that in terms of reporting of that non-negotiation, there's perhaps also been a little bit of misconception around that. I'm sure behind closed doors there has been negotiation, there's been a to and fro, and I think that perhaps there hasn't been enough analysis of that. We've been getting the impression in the media that Amcu they've given this one
and
demand,
they're not even
and
coming into any office.
And I mean, certainly in the public perception, I'm sure Amcu would say that in public statements, it's to strengthen their negotiating point. But I'm sure behind closed doors there's been some give and take, and certainly this new deal certainly displays there is some compensated deal.
I think it's very important I think it's important to also link this negotiation with what happened in 2012, following the shooting and what was negotiated and whether the agreements were actually put into place.
Absolutely.
So there's need for that analysis for people to have a holistic view.
And even for a follow-up so that we know that this started here and it's going this way. And you can hold people accountable for those things. Let's leave it there for that story, unfortunately. Panel, let's move on to our next story. Evicted residents in Lwandle, outside Cape Town, can return to their land to rebuild their shacks as part of a short-term agreement between the City of Cape Town and the Human Settlements Department. Now, this comes after they were forcefully removed last week for illegally occupying land owned by Sanral. Let's take a quick look at this insert compiled by one of our producers, Malebogo Makutle.
More than 800 shack dwellers of Lwandle in the Western Cape were evicted and their homes demolished last week for illegally living on land owned by Sanral.
What we have agreed today is that Sanral must take full responsibility for the rebuilding of 849 structures that were demolished, and that Sanral must also take responsibility to rebuild the structures at a size of 6 meters by 3 meters.
An inquiry into the dispossession of the residents of Strand will be established by the Human Settlements Minister, Lwandle.
The time frame is 2 months because this is an emergency. We would like to understand how we got ourselves into this situation and be able to resolve it as speedily as possible.
There hasn't been a final decision as to when the evicted residents of Lwandle will start to rebuild their homes.
Very sad indeed. Now, Panel, why did this story make such headlines? Is it because the land belonged to Sanral? Matthew?
Well, that was one of the elements that interested me in the reporting on this story. It was that when the story first broke, it was very quickly, in the early stages, painted as a new debate between DA in the Western Cape and ANC and national government. But then quite shortly after the breaking, Sanral were brought into it. And I think as a factor of their already bad reputation in South Africa, they were very quickly painted as the main bad guy. And very quickly you saw the DA and the ANC fall away from reporting, and it was reported on, the headlines were saying Sanral land.
Absolutely.
And I think that's an important element in the debate, is that the reporting on this, sometimes it's not as balanced as we would want, because obviously we understand that landowners have a right to have their land protected, and their land rights protected is an important element of a stable judicial system. But at the same time, the people who are living on this land, they didn't choose to occupy land owned by Sanral. They were looking for a place to live. These are people who are at the bottom rung of our society and had no alternative. And I think that the reporting very quickly becomes high level, focusing on Sanral, focusing on the government, the City of Cape Town, Human Settlements as a department, and we very quickly lose sight of the plight of these people who were without homes for however long it is, and are now having their homes rebuilt for a temporary amount of time. And there doesn't seem to be much reporting in terms of what's going to happen after that. What happens when those homes, that time expires? Are they going to be provided new homes somewhere else? Who's going to be taking responsibility for that? Is it going to become another debate between national government and the city of Cape Town? And I think that's the element we lose.
We certainly want to know the answers to all those questions, Matthew. Phenyo, what do you think? Because I think the point is that the problem persists all over the country. Yeah. But why this particular place and getting such a swift response from the government intervention there?
Yeah, and I think for me the question is, why is the story painted or presented as if this is a particular issue for that particular area?
Yes.
And I think the fact that we miss the opportunity here to raise the issue around land or landlessness, the issue around whether the land policy or the land redistribution has worked. And I think a story like this should have sparked this debate. But I think that because of the focus on what the authorities say, because of the focus on SANRAL, because of getting caught up in the politicking between the DA and the ANC, yes, the real story was lost. And I think the response that you're talking about having been swift is also, for me, an indication of this politicking en route to the municipal elections that are coming. But the story, actually, about people not having land all over this country, I think should have been the angle that dominated this particular.
But, Phenyo, how different are the Lwandle evictions to the ones that were happening in Free State, in Bokamoso, as well as in Alexandra? Matthew?
Well, evictions, in terms of the way they're reported upon, it's quite a difficult matter because we tend to try and, I think, the media in general try to paint evictions, as an issue unto themselves. But the truth is that every eviction is very different. There's the way the land is owned in the first place. It may be a parastatal, it may be a private citizen, it may be, you know, some combination of some municipal land that's being occupied, and the way it's handled as well. You know, there was that period in Johannesburg where the red ants were going into occupied buildings and illegal settlements and just ripping everything apart, and that obviously put a different flavour on the way the reporting was done. And I think it's difficult to say that this is an eviction and this is what's happened, this is how it's going down. I think we need to learn, perhaps as the media and as consumers of the media, to try and look at each eviction as a standalone issue and understand who are the protagonists, what are the issues being dealt with.
Yes.
And that's part of what we try to do at Media Tenor, is try to understand who are the role players in the different stories, how are they being reported on. And it is interesting to see the way the media, and especially the way the government, tend to always become embroiled in this. And very often the government are the last to find out. It may be a private
there's an
citizen.
investigation going on about the legality or the legal aspect of these evictions. We've never heard of that. And Matthew's just mentioned we've heard of many evictions, but none to this extent that there's even an investigative team that goes in there to check, Phenyo.
I think we have said it, that the grander scale of things, when you look at it, you'd see that this has elevated now to the level of politicking and looking ahead to the upcoming municipal elections. But I think the questions still remain. This is a national problem, and as we look at the specificities of each province or each area in terms of evictions, we will then understand the national problem and
on
look
a grand scale
and juxtapose that to the response of government as to whether the government has indeed responded in the manner that we expect them to respond, and whether this problem is being addressed in the first place.
And those are the questions that media should be raising for the people.
And one way of raising these questions is also to diversify the sources and the voices in these stories. And I think, you know, I need to say over and over again that we need to find those missing voices. And part of these missing voices are these people who are being evicted because they have an understanding of what the problem is, you know, from their perspective. They understand better what is going on. They have lived realities that can inform very creatively our understanding of this problem. Theirs is not, they're not going to read about it, they're living it. So they can help us understand it if we capture their voices.
Thank you so much there, Phenyo. Well, we're going to leave it there for now, and when we return, we will discuss whether media covered the recovery journey of Nyaope addicts in Mpumalanga and the ongoing Boko Haram saga. Join the conversation by calling us on +2711 714 6843, 714 6847, 714 6857, and let us know which stories, anywhere you are, you feel were not adequately covered by the media. Share your views and comments on Twitter as well at SA Media Monitor, and of course like our Facebook page, Media Monitor. Don't go anywhere. We'll return shortly after this.
Nissan Qashqai. Urban proof, mastered. Save up to 49,000 Rand on the multi-award-winning crossover. Nissan, innovation that excites.
Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor, and you can be part of our discussion by calling us and sending us tweets. In our next story, one of the daily newspapers on Wednesday, the 11th of June, had a story headline slugged, "Nyaope addicts take charge." It's a story about self-confessed Nyaope addicts in Nkangala in the Mpumalanga province who apprehended 3 men who tried to smuggle the drug into a hole where they were recovering from addiction. Now, this group of desperate young people has voluntarily locked themselves up in a bid to kick the habit. The community of Nkangala is reported to have rallied behind the group and provided food and moral support. Let's take a look at this clip.
We are in the process of recovering so that when we leave this place, we can be free, sober-minded, and we can tackle life head-on.
We started this organization, Youth Alive, because our parents advised us that this Nyaope drug is lethal.
When you smoke Nyaope, you sleep. You see, you sleep. You see, yeah, you sleep home. You see, when you finish to sleep, you wake up. You see, when you wake up, your stomach is very sore inside. You see, you want another Nyaope to another man to buy another Nyaope.
I want to quit, but it's not that simple. Even rehabs, rehab make you think about the drugs more when you come back. You see, I think it needs determination. You must be determined you yourself to say, now I want to leave this. Because rehabs, we've tried many rehabs, but after all, we are still here, you see. So I can't say, nah, maybe I need to go to a rehab. No, you see, I need to have a self-control.
Another very interesting story panel. This is obviously a great story that could help others in those people's positions immensely, but only one paper covered it, and that was Sowetan. What are your views, Matthew?
Well, the story was it's one of those stories that's immensely interesting from a human interest perspective. You know, these guys, or guys and young ladies who are facing addiction, and they obviously decided that they can't beat this alone, and they've banded together to try and do what they can. And beating an addiction such as that is incredibly difficult. And the steps they've taken must be commended. But at the same time, it's something that needs support. And I think that giving it good coverage would result in that support. Communities could come together. People outside of their community would be able to hear of the story, and perhaps people with expertise could then step in and assist them. And it certainly hasn't received the reporting that we would have hoped. And I think it's a factor of the fact that drugs in general are reported in a broad sense. The stories about drugs tend to be from a statistical perspective. The numbers that are coming in, or it's reported on when there's a bust in terms of smugglers busted at the airport or at ports and that kind of thing. The human angle of drug addiction is very rarely reported on in the media, and that's something perhaps we need to look at in terms of tackling the problem from the media's perspective.
Absolutely. I'm sure people would like to know how other people actually got to kick their habits in one way or another. And you know how South Africa, well, majority of people, they like to say, well, I want to see a living example of anything. So, Phenyo, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree that it would really help to move away from the statistics and the mathematical estimations as to how many people are using this drug or the other, but to look now and get to the stories or lived realities of the people themselves who are using these drugs. And I think if these voices were given, these people were given the voice in the mainstream media, I think it would inspire other people who are using this. But I think this brings, you know, into focus, you know, whether the community medias who are supposed to be tackling these issues at a local level.
That's what we're actually speaking about.
Yes, at a local level are doing what they're supposed to be doing. But I think that also brings another question as to whether the community media in this country, or the three-tier system, as it were, where you have your commercial, your community, and whether the structure has worked. because when you look at the community media, your community radio and your community newspapers, they're faced with huge structural problems, capacity issues. And our interaction as FXI with them has really shown that this structure or this sector of our media has been forgotten. Nobody is talking about the MDDA is supposed to be giving them capacity. That hasn't worked. So we need to go back to the drawing board and look at this a very, very important aspect of the media, because they are the ones who have the insight. They are close to these issues, and they don't have this problem of selling papers like your commercial media. So we need to fix that structure and ensure that it works, and then it can feed onto the mainstream media.
Very interesting indeed. But now this also brings the question, has the media ignored the story solely because it happened in an unfamiliar place and only affects the poor black community? Matthew?
Well, that again speaks to the issue of the community press and whether they're doing their job in terms of elevating stories that should be of national interest. And I often find, in my experience with community newspapers, a lot of them end up, instead of being a newspaper, they just become newsletters, you know, and they're just talking about what's going on in the community. And they're not doing the journalistic job of looking for those stories that are going on in their local community but have a national or a regional interest. And I think that there needs to be more support given to those shows. There are examples of really good editors at community papers who are able to elevate stories. Very often it is in Gauteng or you know, the surrounding Johannesburg and Pretoria, where it's easier to get the big editors on the line. But I think it's possible with the correct support for the community press to do a better job of elevating stories to a national level. And stories like this are just one such example.
Thank you so much there, Matthew, saying that the community media needs to be responsible in elevating all those issues that they feel should be receiving widespread national attention. All right, now let's move on to our next story. Suspected Boko Haram gunmen have kidnapped 20 women from a nomadic settlement in northeast Nigeria near the town of Chibok, where the Islamist militants abducted the nearly 300 girls in April, most of whom are still missing. Meanwhile, the Nigerian military have revealed its plans to beef up security in football viewing places during the World Cup. Now, panel, has the media done justice in terms of giving us this? Let's start with the South African media. We don't know much about the coverage, and I think you can tell us more, Matthew, in terms of what goes wrong when local media is reporting about stories within Africa, but we just don't get the extensive facts.
Well, there's two sides to the problem. I mean, first of all, the South African media is very inward-looking. We have a lot of journalists who focus on looking at South African local issues. We've got a wealth of political reporters and sub-editors who deal with local issues and who are experts on local issues. But there's very few specialist correspondents and journalists who look at foreign affairs issues. It's a really small number. And as a result, they're very overstretched. They have to choose what they're going to focus on. And often these stories fall through the cracks until they're massive international issues, such as Boko Haram's most recent stuff in April. And so then there's the other side of the problem, which is how do we decide which of these issues are the most significant and which ones are, you know, are worthy of our reporting on. And certainly Boko Haram has become one of those stories. And so it's worth understanding that at the same time as having the difficulty of not having journalists here, it's also very difficult to get information out of these areas. Places like Nigeria are very difficult to report in. I mean, the Nigerian government has also done quite a poor job of communicating about their activity there, which makes it hard because journalists don't want to just report rumour and hearsay. They have to have the facts. And getting those facts is the difficult part.
They just want to take stuff from Reuters and edit it. And
exactly. It's difficult to get that accurate content out of places like the far northern reaches of Nigeria.
But
so we
those
have to give
issues can be addressed, Matthew, certainly.
They can, but it takes a level of funding that sometimes the South African media isn't prepared to put into foreign affairs issues. Having a strong network of stringers in relatively rural parts of northern Nigeria, it's an expensive undertaking, and it's one that perhaps the South African media need to look at because, I mean, for me, I'm a fan of international news. I want to know what's going on in the world. But maybe that's not everyone's taste, and I think the South African media maybe need to look at a way of doing that in an effective and affordable way where they can still get the facts, because in northern Nigeria, we're missing these facts. There's the stories about Boko Haram, we're only hearing very much second-hand news from there. And I think it's worthy of greater interrogation.
All right, just hold that thought there, Matthew. And on the line, we're now joined by political analyst Richard Iroanya. Mr. Iroanya, a very good morning to you, and thank you for joining us on the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Now, Richard, what are the views of ordinary Nigerians about the state of affairs in Nigeria? The reports indicate that the Nigerians are quite dissatisfied with the way that government is handling the current situations.
Well, that is exactly the situation. Nigerians are dissatisfied. Nigerians are unhappy with the government. But not only with the government, Nigerians are also not happy with the military because Boko Haram has exposed certain inadequacies that is found in the Nigerian security institution. And we have found that the military is divided. We have found that the military has been helping Boko Haram in terms of logistics, in terms of information, and in terms of equipment. And so fighting Boko Haram has become a very big problem, a thorny issue in the flesh of the Nigerian government. And so the general populace is not happy about the situation. And of course, they are helpless because we look up to the government as a target of our demands.
Now, Richard, we would like to know, how has the local Nigerian media tackled this issue? It seems like no one is willing to just write a full expose of what exactly Boko Haram is. Is it a security issue for journalists to do the story?
I think it's quite a bit of it. If you recall, just recently, the military went about confiscating published materials of the Point newspaper and also the Leadership newspaper. So despite the fact that we have the Freedom Act, Freedom of Information Act passed, and we've been finding it difficult to access information, from the government sources. And of course, a lot of secrecy exists about the Boko Haram issue. And of course, the publication that we have confiscated, we are reporting about the trial of certain military officers who were aiding Boko Haram. And the military wanted that to remain secret, to give the impression that the military is not divided, the military is united. And that is very, very wrong. And so, like you said, I think the journalists have not been given much access, to the activities of Boko Haram and even what the extent of Nigerian government's effort to make sure that this issue is resolved.
Richard, thank you so much for your time and your views this morning.
Thank you very much.
Now, panel, isn't it very interesting that Richard is in Nigeria? He's assessing the situation, and he says even in Nigeria, the resources there and the sources for the story are just not available. So then what do we do as the local South African media, Phenyo?
Yeah, I think he raised a very, very critical point, which is
because we just seem to blame the South African media to say they're lazy, they're not going out to get the facts.
He's raising a very important point of access to information. And I think the drive in Africa to have access to information laws, I think for me, it seems to be now losing steam. But this is a very, very important part in terms of the media being able to do its job in terms of, unearthing some of these issues and providing full stories to the consumers. And I think when you look at Nigeria and its makeup and lack of access to information, it really makes the situation impossible. And when you are a foreign media with the problems that my colleague has just mentioned in terms of the problems that are facing our local media resources and the compatibilization of the local media in terms of now focusing on doing business, what would sell the story, and not putting resources more on the investigative side of media. I think those combined with the difficulties in easily accessing media makes it very difficult for our journalists.
But where can we then chip in, Matthew? What can we do as a local media to assist?
I think, it must be said that, our research, we did at Media Tenor, we did some research into the coverage of Boko Haram, and it's certainly true that once the story peaked, the South African media did do a good job of getting on board and reporting, and they do a good job of reporting the local angles of these African stories. Local analysts, the reaction by the ANC Women's League, these kind of things did get very good reporting locally. Where we perhaps struggle is breaking the news in Africa, which is perhaps what the South African media should do a better job of. I mean, these stories were broken by international agencies.
And it's happening right in our doorstep.
Yes, and it should be something that South African media can do better. That said, there's the difficulties around access to information in these countries, Nigeria is a particularly difficult example. The government does not do a great job communicating, and even the interviews the military are giving now, they're very sort of opaque, and they say we know these things but we can't tell you. We have a plan but we can't share it.
I don't understand that. They go out in public to tell the media we know where the girls are. Boko Haram's going to be watching, and then they're going to move the girls to a different location. All right, let's leave it there for now, panel. And when we return, we're going to look at the coverage of the FIFA 2014 Brazil World Cup. You can still be part of our discussion by expressing your views as to which stories you think should have been covered by the media by calling us on +2711 714 6843, 714 6847 and 714 6857. Share your views and comments on Twitter at SA Media Monitor and like our Facebook page. This is Media Monitor. Don't go anywhere.
Zoom into Africa. This is the Republic of Congo. The president is Mr. Denis Sassou Nguesso, got independent from France on 15th August in 1960. The population is more than 4 million people. One of the major languages spoken is French. Monetary unit is CFA.
Welcome back to Media Monitor. You can also be part of our discussion by calling us on the numbers that will appear at the bottom of your screens, or contact us on Facebook as well as Twitter. In our next story, the much-anticipated 2014 FIFA Soccer World Cup kicked off in Sao Paulo, Brazil on Thursday, the 12th of June. Now, the opening ceremony and first games of the tournament went well, even though the build-up to the event has been hit by a number of protests. Now, panel, just days ago, media was tearing Brazil apart about the protests and everything else, but as soon as kick-off happened, it was about the beautiful butts on the beach. It was the players and the coaches and everything else, and the mood that has arisen in Brazil. What do you think, Matthew?
Well, for us at Media Tenor, this has actually been a really big topic. We've been following the World Cup massively over the last few months, and it's been something that's interested us a lot. And one of the surprising things we found was that despite all of the protests and everything that's been going on, the reputation of FIFA has actually been improving over the last few years, which just goes to show what a low base they were coming from. Obviously, it remains to be seen if they'll survive this latest scandal about Qatar. But as you said, the opening statement has just kicked off a whole new level of coverage. I mean, I think Twitter alone received several million tweets in that first day, and it's it is a world event. That's the thing about the World Cup. It's not a local issue. It's not something you can report on within a vacuum. It's the World Cup, and so we've had to understand that though the protests are a massive issue for people in Brazil and people who are watching Brazil very closely as a country, the World Cup, the opening ceremony and the games themselves, those affect everyone, even people who have absolutely no interest in local politics in Brazil whatsoever. So that's going to take over the focus. Probably for the duration of the tournament, we're going to see the vast majority of coverage focusing on the positive vibes around the games and the experience of the fans themselves. And then I think after the World Cup ends, we'll start to see a return to these more controversial issues, both for FIFA as an organization and Brazil as a country.
So they just let sleeping dogs lie, have fun, and then they'll deal with it at a later stage, which is very unfortunate.
I'm just, it's funny how this football and the fanfare tends to make us forget about these underlying issues. And it was how the president of Brazil said, let the games begin and then let Brazil win the first game. All those protesters will be happy and we'll deal with it after that. And this is exactly what happened after the Brazil wins.
Absolutely.
Now Neymar got how many thousand tweets and following and followers. So it goes to show now that the focus is on the game and the beautiful game of football.
Now, panel, local media, even though South Africa is not participating, what do you think of the coverage? Has it been positive?
I think the local media were quite honest in the reporting. There was certainly, we were able, as South African media consumers, to get a sense of the unease in Brazil. And I think it's probably because we had our own World Cup in 2010 and we were comparing the experiences. We were very much, there's been a lot of analysis over the last few months about the legacy of 2010 and looking forward to how it may differ in Brazil and how our experiences differ. I mean, if you remember in 2010, all the reporting was positive. There was a few issues around strikes in the build-up to 2009, but the coverage of 2010 was overwhelmingly positive. And I think that's been compared quite starkly with Brazil, where there's been an overwhelming number of negative reports coming out of Brazil. And that's been quite good from the local media's perspective. I think they've done a good job in terms of presenting us with the comparison of the two.
I fully agree. I think they've done a good job of comparing the two. And I think also focusing on
only because they feel they're more triumphant. You know, everybody thinks that South Africa hosted the best World Cup ever.
Yeah. And I think, I agree that after the World Cup, perhaps we'll get back to the issues and the fact that FIFA hasn't really run things
But did we do
overboard.
that in South Africa? Did media do that in South Africa after our own World Cup to say, well, look, they said that this is how the economy is going to benefit. Has the economy benefited? To what extent? Nobody's asked, or the media hasn't raised those questions.
There was very little
certainly.
analysis of that, it must be said. There was, following the end of 2010, I think the feel-good vibe lasted for the whole of 2010.
Yes.
You know, and it was only really 2011 when the economy started to bite. Then we started to look back. And even now we look back, and the legacy, though, is it's an intangible thing with the World Cup. You know, and I think the media's tried to. It's difficult for them to say this is the legacy, it's this much money, because you can't really say that, because the investment that was done before the World Cup, it's not just in stadiums. Obviously, those are the ones that you see and they're quite in your face, but there's also investment that took place around infrastructure, expanding the airports, improving road networks, and that's a legacy that we do still feel today.
Yes.
And I think that perhaps in the reporting in Brazil, we may, after the World Cup, also see some more fair analysis of that, because at this stage we're receiving figures. Brazil has spent 11 billion, they're only expected to make 3 billion. What was the point? But maybe after the World Cup, we'll be able to get some analysis. Where did that 11 billion go? And what will the long-term legacy be of a vastly improved internal transport network, which Brazil was in dire need of? And so it'll be interesting to see how the reporting goes once the World Cup is finished and the feel-good factor of watching Brazil win.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Well, if they're giving us figures, we certainly want to know what happened to those figures.
Yes.
So they should give us an analysis afterwards. Panel, I want to thank you now for being on the show. Phenyo Butale, and of course, Mr. Matthew Wate, researcher at Media Tenor. And of course, now we're going to take a very quick ad break. And when we return, we're going to be speaking to our young guests analysing Youth Day tomorrow. And you can be part of our conversation, of course, by calling us and sending us tweets. We'll be back right after this.
A forensic audit report has found that the Independent Electoral Commission's procurement of new premises was neither fair nor transparent.
That wasn't a nice experience to see someone die like that. 18-year-old, I mean, he's still a child.
It's very pretty. Yeah, it looks very great.
Locals say they have their own big five: cattle, sheep, horses, donkeys and pigs.
That's Morning Live, daily at 6 a.m. on SABC News.
Good evening and welcome to yet another edition of Sports Live, the show that brings you the latest local and international news, live interviews with the who's who in sport. He's the first South African to wear a yellow jersey that was at the Tour de France this year.
It's the first time that we get a boxer who's recognized by the Ring magazine as the best fighter in the planet to visit our country.
And he's very close to world record pace. And in fact, it is a new world record.
When you cross the line, what went through one's mind?
None of the four of us knew where it won. The scoreboard is always on the left, but all of us tend to the right. No, we just waited for the country to go down. RSA.
That's Sports Live, daily at 8:30 p.m. on SABC News.
Why are protests violent? And why does it seem that the police are incapable of dealing with violent crowds?
The government of the day is failing the people, and it's leading to a lot of frustration. A person becomes a councillor or a minister, within a week, within 2 months, is riding a beautiful car. So all this is actually frustrating the people and giving the wrong
You don't
message.
expect a councillor to ride a horse.
Not a horse, but maybe a Toyota Corolla.
That's Rights and Recourse, Sundays 2 p.m. on SABC News.
Welcome back to Media Monitor. Remember, you can also be part of our discussion by contacting us on the numbers that appear at the bottom of our screens. There they are, not forgetting Facebook as well as Twitter. Now, South Africa will be commemorating Youth Day tomorrow. Today, we try to establish the difference between the 1976 youth and the youth of today and how the media has transformed. And, of course, to help us do that, now as Media Monitor, we like to pride ourselves, of course, of always aspiring to getting the real views from real people. So let's now welcome our young guest, Nomzamo Buyani, a final-year journalism student at Damelin College, Refiloe Ramahlokoane, a grade 10 learner at Reasoma Secondary School, and Mr. Mandla Mathebula, a former media studies student at the University of Limpopo. My young guests, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Media Monitor.
Thank you very much.
Now, I would just want to understand this. Let's start with you, Nomzamo. As a journalism student, has the media educated you and your peers enough about the real essence of Youth Day?
I would like to say thank you very much for this opportunity once again. Yes, I believe that the media has done very well. If it wasn't for the media, we wouldn't really know what the day signifies. And I say that the media has done very well because if you look at activities like and documentaries like Sarafina, if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't really know what the day represents and what really happened on that day. So I think the media is doing very well.
You're happy about it?
Yes.
All right, Refiloe, I mean, I was in grade 10 not so long ago. Yeah. You are in grade 10. Do you rely on the media to give you the facts about our history?
Oh, yes, I do, because if it wasn't about the children of the 1976, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Yeah. All right. Okay. And Mandla, how can media connect with young people, especially those less fortunate, no internet gadgets, all they have is the media? How can media then reach out to them?
Well, I think luckily these days it's hard for you to find families that don't have access to TV. So I think for those that don't have access to other media, TV still remains the essentially the go-to media. So I think what we need to do maybe is to have, especially during the month of Youth Day, more programming that actually talks to youth and that talks to the essence of the day itself. Because I think a lot of us young people have lost touch with what Youth Day signifies. And I think we can do that through TV. We can still do that through radio. Luckily now we all have access to social media. We can do that. We can also use those as well.
All right. Now what I want to know is, what is your take on comparing the media space for the youth back in 1976 and now? Let's start with you, Nomzamo.
When you look in 1976, there's a difference between now, because now you can go anywhere. You can Google it. We have smartphones these days, so you can't say you don't know anything about June 16. So when you look at before that, they didn't really have much resources. So these days we have the internet, we have TV, we have radio, which is back in the day they didn't really have nothing. You know, they have just limited information. So we are very proud as the youth of today.
We're very lucky indeed.
Yeah, very
now
lucky.
the theme of Youth Day this year is Youth Moving South Africa Forward. Has the media explained to you what this means, Refiloe? Do you understand what this theme is all about?
Oh, I would say like kind of, because I wasn't there in the 1976. Well, but now we have access to internet easily. Then we have more information about what has happened years back.
All right. Yeah. And Mandla, what do you think? Do you understand this theme of youth moving South Africa forward? What does it say to you?
Well, as the youth, I think we need to appreciate that we have a role to play. I think the theme is on point. we are the people that are to move South Africa forward. I think we need to actually appreciate it in that sense, to say, as the young people of today, we are basically the future of South Africa. So we need to appreciate that for South Africa to move forward, we need to take ourselves seriously. We need to educate ourselves and actually understand our history as well, so that we can understand where we are going and moving forward.
Let's now compare the coverage of Youth Day and the commemorations from way back up until now. How has that difference been to you, Nomzamo?
If it wasn't for the media, like I said, I wouldn't know anything about it.
You really praise the media because you're a journalism student.
Yes.
But looking at it from an outsider, say somebody who's your age but does not necessarily study journalism, do you think that they have the same kind of access to the media that you do?
I don't think so. But I think because I am more focused on the media side, so I really know about it. But for a person who's not aware about the media, they still have to do more just to make sure that they cover all aspects, not only maybe the TV side and the radio side, because everybody deserves to know. So it's very important for people to make sure that they cover all aspects. Whether you're reading a newspaper, you need to know about it. Whether you're watching a TV or listening to radio, you need to know about this day, because it's very important. If it wasn't for June 16, we wouldn't have this education that we have today as young people.
That we're sitting and boasting about. Well, thank you so much to my panels. We're going to take a very quick ad break now, and after the break, I will read your tweets. You can still share your views and comments on Twitter at SA Media Monitor, and of course, like our Facebook page. We return shortly after this. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to our final segment of Media Monitor right here on SABC News, all local, all global, and all the time. It's that time where we get to make our famous viewers, our loyal viewers, rather very famous by getting to read some of the tweets that you guys have sent us on the discussions that we've been having today. Let's take a look at some of the comments that you've sent us today. At SA Media Monitor, Ernest Masola says, mostly at times, I felt like the media was defending mine companies, shifting blame of unions because it affected the economy. Ernest Masola, thank you so much. In relation to the Amcu story, Kaya Gashu says, does the wage deal justify the wages forgone by workers during the strike? I hope it does. Well, Kaya, we also certainly hope they can answer that question for you. Levi Kwabato says, media have an obligation to always side with the oppressed and those suffering injustice. Evictees portrayed as unreasonable. Thank you so much to Levi Kwabato. Solidarity says a system of land ownership based on feudalism can never be humane. It's un-African. Government must collapse it. It's that simple. Wow. Thank you so much, Solidarity. Lwandle, last but not least, says media has ignored this drug-related tragedy for too long anyway. Many youths have fallen prey to drug abuse. Thank you so much to Lwandle Ngazile. And of course, let me take just one more. Mildred Pierre says, yes, it does. It has been a long time coming. If it wasn't the processes government follow, it was supposed to be criminalized long ago. Thank you so much to all our viewers for all your tweets and contributions. Now, panel, I want to know from you, what do you think is going to be the big stories this week in all over the media, TV, radio, and everywhere? Let's start with you, Mandla.
Well, not really sure, but at the moment, some of us are focused on the World Cup. So we'll be following that closely to see exactly what happens, and probably we'll be trending a lot on Twitter.
All right, Refiloe.
Oh, I think like as he said, we will be focusing on World Cup and Youth Day. I like to explain what is Youth Day mean to me.
Yes.
And Youth Day to me means that we honor the youth of 1976, the heroes and heroines, those who laid down their lives to struggle for freedom, peace, and democracy. Those who gave their lives so that we and the future generation could free ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, that's a very young person in here in studio shaking things up. Nomzamo, your turn. What do you think will be the biggest stories this week?
I think the biggest story will be the Lwandle eviction. And regarding that, we've seen that it's been blowing up. And I think also the other story that we'll be talking about is obviously the World Cup. And the fact that Spain lost to
Netherlands.
To Netherlands 5-1. So
thank you so much, panel. But I was hoping you were going to say that Youth Day was going to be covered more immensely in anything in relation to youth. Well, that's how we end our show. Thank you so much to my young panelists. Our viewers' contributions and suggestions is highly valued. Remember, you can email us your views about the show at mediamonitor@sabc.co.za. Share your views and comments on Facebook. Go to www.facebook.com/Media Monitor and, of course, like our page. You can also follow us on Twitter @SA Media Monitor. Thank you so much for watching Media Monitor. Join us again next week right here on SABC News. We're all local, all global, and all the time. For myself, Alicia Jali, and the rest of the QTIV team, have yourself a blessed Sunday and a wonderful Father's Day to all dads, and Happy Youth Day to all of us youth. Goodbye.
Zoom into Africa. This is Sierra Leone. The president is Mr. Ernest Bai Koroma. Sierra Leone got independent from the United Kingdom on 27 April in 1961. The population is more than 6 million people. One of the major languages spoken is English. Monetary unit is Leone.
Good evening and welcome to yet another edition of Sports Live, the show that brings you the latest local and international news, live interviews with the who's who in sport. He's the first South African to wear a yellow jersey that was at the Tour de France this year.
It's the first time that we get a boxer who's recognized by the Ring magazine as the best fighter in the planet to visit our country.
And he's very close to world record pace. And in fact, it is a new world record.
When you cross the line, what went through one's mind?
None of the four of us knew who had won. The scoreboard is always on the left, but all of us tend to the right. No, we just waited for the country to go down. RSA.
That's Sports Live, daily at 8:30 p.m. on SABC News. Zoom into Africa. This is Madagascar. The president is Mr. Heri Rajaonarimampianina. Madagascar got independent from France on 26 June in 1960. The population is more than 21 million people. One of the major languages spoken is French. Monetary unit is Ariari.
99% Zulu has returned to the Lyric Theatre in Gold Reef City in Johannesburg this weekend.
Now do the Mateba jive. The Mateba jive. This guy doesn't know how to do the Mateba jive.
Sarah Dupree is bringing his celebrity impersonations to Johannesburg. Audiences will be treated to nights of glitz and glamour and Cher, Lady Gaga, Tina Turner and more impersonations.
That's Afro Showbiz News, Saturdays, 7:30 p.m. on SABC News. Zoom into Africa. This is Seychelles. The president is Mr. James Michel James. Seychelles got independent from United Kingdom on 29 June in 1976. The population is over 80,000 people. One of the major languages spoken is English. Monetary unit is the Seychelles rupee.
very warm welcome to you on this beautiful Sunday morning. It's the 15th of June 2014 and the time is 10 o'clock Central African time. Good morning and welcome to AM News on SABC News. Of course, if you are on DSTV, you know we're on channel 404, and do stay with us as we bring you only the latest in your current news, of course, making waves locally and globally. My name is Damelin College and I'll be your host, of course, until 12:30, just updating you on all news that are relevant to you and your area. Well, as you know, Ramahlokoane is not with us, but I have the honor and privilege of working with Mr. Kendall Mahamate today. Good morning.
Good morning.
That's so suave.
Thank you very much. What a beautiful introduction. I really do appreciate that. In fact, it goes very well with the World Cup goals. I mean, like goals galore in the World Cup, an average of 3 to 4 goals per match. And the Springboks, they ran riot over Wales yesterday, beating them 28-9. But more about that in the bulletin.
I know that Kendall is one of those excited ones when the Netherlands won against Spain. I mean, I think this year should be themed revenge. I mean, all the teams that didn't necessarily make it in the 2010 World Cup are now making the revenge.
Yeah, no, lots of upsets, and we'll be covering that later in the bulletin. Mark Haskins is coming through. We're going to do a wrap of last night as well as a preview of what's happening tonight.
I'm excited. But Kendall, of course, will be updating you on all those sports, World Cup action and more a little bit later on in the bulletin, live from the sports desk. But for now, let's take a look at stories making news headlines. The presidency says President Jacob Zuma is feeling much better and is expected to be back at work tomorrow. The United States is moving an aircraft carrier into the Gulf as militants take control of more of the country.